New polling breaks down the president's approval rating and how he squares up against the 2020 Democratic presidential contenders. Israel bans Congresswomen Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar from visiting, then partially reverses the decision for one of them. And also AOC and Ben Shapiro got into a little spat that we want to tell you about.
Team Rising is here to weigh in on all of this. Colin Rogero is a Democratic strategist, and Patrice Onwuka is a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Welcome to you both.
Happy Friday, guys.
Thank you.
You too?
Yeah, I mean, we have got a very interesting little head-to-head matchup poll from Fox News, and showing Joe Biden beating Donald Trump at 50-38, Bernie Sanders 48-39, Elizabeth Warren 46-39, 45-39 with Kamala Harris. Patrice, not great numbers there for the president, but we should note, I mean, this isn't an electoral college map. Like, you could win all the vote, maybe this 50%, the majority of these people.
But
no, yeah, but not necessarily. But I mean, if you bring that number up to how much did you win? 42, 43 in the general election in 2016. If this 50% is all drawing from people in like California and New York, that doesn't actually mean anything in terms of the electoral college.
You know, what we saw in 2016 was the silent Trump vote. Those folks who were not willing to tell pollsters that they were going to vote for him, but they did. And then you also had something interesting, which is the 1.8 million Obama voters who sat out the election,
right,
and no doubt will sit it out again in 2020 if they're not excited about the candidate. So I do think that the campaign is probably looking at these numbers, but I don't think they're taking a huge stock in it right now.
I mean, it's noteworthy, and these are much worse numbers for the president than the last time that Fox News did head-to-head matchups. So the trend for him is not in the right direction.
Yeah. The trend is not good, and I would say, to speak to the Obama voters, they don't need an Obama on the ticket this time because there's Donald Trump on the ticket, and that's where the motivation is going to come from, base motivation for these core Obama voters who sat out last time. Well, they're not sitting out again.
I don't know if that's true, because Hillary Clinton made that bet in 20 with this person is so morally repugnant and reprehensible. Yeah, it didn't work out so well. So like, you actually need to have.
That was then. They didn't know what they were buying now. They know what they bought now, and they are not in the same place they were 4 years ago.
Go ahead, Patrice.
A lot of what people bought were, someone who would install Supreme Court justices who would uphold the Constitution.
Exactly.
They bought someone who would deregulate the economy, which would trigger economic growth, move it beyond what Obama and the Obama administration said was impossible, beyond 2%. So and of course, low unemployment, not just a little bit below 5%. We're talking about historically low, consistently. So people may not like the president's rhetoric all the time, but they love his policies.
Colin, I think Patrice makes. I think we're about to get to his approval ratings, which maybe say a different story than what you're telling us right now, Patrice. But Colin, on the political strategy, I think Patrice makes a good point, which is that Democrats have a much better shot at winning the White House by getting those Obama voters, by getting those young voters, those infrequent voters, those voters of color, getting them excited into the polls. They have a much better shot with that path, the base turnout strategy, than with trying to win back Trump voters who are pretty locked in to support with him.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I think as we whittle the field and we finally get to a nominee, we're going to see the campaigns and people that come around to help motivate those base voters, help appeal to the young voters, help appeal to the disaffected Obama voter that didn't come out last time, or even the ones that maybe voted for Trump for something different, and now we're looking to say, maybe that wasn't the right decision.
But that's a good segue to the approval rating, which is that President Trump's got approval rating of 43%, 56% disapproval rating. Now, it's easy to look at that and say, that's not very good. Actually, the New York Times, of all people, are the people who told us just last week, that's around the exact same point that President Obama was in his lead up to the 2012 election, 43%. And let's remember, he won the presidency with like a 38% approval rating, because Hillary Clinton also had like a 39% approval rating. You don't have to have a good approval rating to win the presidency, and I actually think 43 puts him in a much more electable territory than where he was in 2016. What do you think, Patrice?
I think so too, and I'll add to that, his support among minorities is rising. So I've seen a poll where among Hispanic, his approval rating is like 49, 50, something like that. And among blacks, it's up to 25%. So, I mean, what's interesting is that he's starting to tap into those communities. Remember when he said in 2016 or 2015, what do you have to lose? Give me a shot. He's now, and there have been a couple of episodes recently that have allowed him to put the spotlight on the failures of Democratic Democratic policies in urban cities and the good job and the good work that his policies have done for communities of color.
We should be careful about cherry picking polls because other polls do not show for anywhere near 49% Latino approval for this president, which I would fall over and die if he got anywhere near in the next election. So let's just put that out there. But I think another noteworthy thing in this poll, Colin, and look, I agree with Sagar. I don't take this guy for granted. I think he could easily win re-election, especially if we nominate, a candidate who is lackluster, who isn't really up to the job. So putting that aside, though, the other piece of this is in this poll, 56% disapprove, 48% say they strongly disapprove. So you've got nearly half the country saying absolutely not.
And I think more important than that, the trend is moving in the wrong direction, period. And that's whether it's with minorities or not. And first of all, a poll that says 49% of Latinos or Hispanics support the president is a misnomer because you cannot classify Latinos across with one period and drop one map. Because if you're adding in the Cuban vote in Miami and in Florida, this is a staunch Republican vote. That's not reflective of where Latinos are across the country by any means.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think casting a wide brush against Latinos is ridiculous when you have like Puerto Rican, Dominican, all these different communities just in New York alone, not let alone the rest of the country, Nevada in particular. I think the main thing here is about the strategy. So like it's what you were getting with Crystal, which is if you nominate a Joe Biden, not only will Trump flog him ridiculously on all of these gaffes and all this Sleepy Joe, etc., but Patrice is what you were getting at, which is within the African American community. That's what you need in actually to deliver a lot of these Sun Belt states if that's where you want to win. Guess what? He has a credible case, Trump does, that he has been better on criminal justice reform than Joe Biden with the First Step Act versus Joe Biden's support for the 1994 crime bill. Colin, how is he going to grapple with that if he goes up against Trump?
Joe Biden, first of all, look, the guy's been in public service for 40 years. All of us in a 40-year span have made mistakes and things that we wish we could take back, period. Well, I have, don't tell me. I can't hide it anymore, unfortunately. So, look, he just has to say, look, I have evolved. I did what I thought was best for the most people at that point in time, and I realized that it wasn't. And everybody in this race, Donald Trump included in his business dealings, can say, hey, I have made mistakes before.
But all he has to do is muddy the water. And that's the thing. That's the problem for Biden on criminal justice reform, which I also don't want to characterize that as like a single issue that black voters care about, but it's an important issue, right? He wasn't just a vote. He was one of the chief architects of mass incarceration in this country. And he hasn't fully reckoned with that legacy and with that history and truly evolved. You can see it in a sort of lock 'em up attitude that he took to the debate stage about immigrants. So, look, you're right. Look, Trump's history on racial issues is terrible. His present on racial issues is terrible. But all he has to do is muddy the waters a little bit to get that depressed turnout that Hillary Clinton faced last time around.
So I'm going to back up and say we're assuming that Biden is going to survive the Democratic primary.
Nobody here is assuming that. Maybe Colin, but I can tell you nobody else is.
I wouldn't
I think we're talking about him as though he's running the general and up against Trump, but he still has to get through the primary. And it's interesting to see how Elizabeth Warren has rocketed to number 2 now. And she's kicked out Bernie because took his ideas and really actually fleshed them out. The professor in her did that. And so it's going to be interesting to see the damage done to Biden by Elizabeth Warren, and I wouldn't count out Harris.
If you want to talk about black vote in particular, though, Warren has the worst support of these top-tier candidates in the black community.
The two candidates, actually, which you wouldn't know necessarily from the media coverage, the two candidates who have risen the most post-debate are Warren and Sanders. The progressive vote is expanding. I think Sagar's analysis is right that as Harris, Buttigieg, and others have fallen, that white liberal vote has consolidated behind Warren.
But that's not how you win the primary. That's not actually how and that's definitely not how you're going to win a general election.
No. You need a path that's beyond just the white liberal vote. And if you're just fighting over the white liberal vote, that's a losing strategy and a losing path.
They have a lot of money.
I just think to talk about what you brought up before about the African American vote in Joe Biden, if you look at the primary polling, he's incredibly popular among African Americans. Incredibly popular. So I don't see that as big a liability as many other people do. They know what they get with Joe Biden because he backed up Obama, and there's a lot of affinity there for those voters.
There is, and I think the biggest mistake a lot of these Democrats are making is knocking President Obama on the stage. and that might be what maybe 20% of the Democratic Party wants to hear. A lot of the Democratic base, they love Obama. If he ran today, he would win in an instant. He would blow them all out of the water.
That the younger Democratic voters are, I think, different than the older ones, particularly among the African American community.
Right.
I mean, the affinity is there with the older voters.
They like
who
Bernie.
do turn out
Bernie
to vote.
is number one among young African
Now,
Americans.
will young black people turn out to vote? I don't know. Maybe Jay-Z is going to be successful with the NFL and kind of that whole issue. Maybe turning it out, but I'm not sure.
All right, sit tight. We have more Rising coming up right after this.